Good morning, brothers and sisters. Again, I want to join our moderator in welcoming you to this first interactive session for the year 2025. I'm sorry that I am not physically on the ground because of an emergency that arose that I had to be in Abuja by the time that this session is starting today. But I thank God that we can share and not postpone it for any reason again. We have been dealing on this series of living wisely. And to kick off this year's interactive session, we have titled our discussion as Living Wisely and Understanding and Submitting, by understanding and submitting to the sovereignty of God in times like this. Living wisely by understanding and submitting to the sovereignty of God in times like this. You know that we have been taking our series from Ephesians chapter 5 that talks about what we have to do in this times like this. Say we should not be fools, but we be wise people who understand the purpose of God, the will of God, and who are operating according to the will of God and knowing what pleases Him. So we are starting this year with looking at the sovereignty of God and how it impacts our effectiveness and also our competence in fulfilling what God has called us to do. Especially because we are living at a time when there are so many contending interests, so many things that are posing as sovereign, who want us to bow to them, who want us to submit to them. But there's a sovereignty that supersedes all, and that is what we are going to look at. And we're going to base our discussion mainly from what happened to a king in the days of Daniel, somebody that felt that he is the Alpha and Omega. And of course, God gave him that power at that time, and that was King Nebuchadnezzar. He towered above every other kingdom and every other king. And he did things even to the point of setting up his statue so that people will worship him. And it was somebody who wielded such power. And of course, every power that we have on the earth is transient. It is just what God allows. And God allows it for a purpose, like we are going to see in the case of Nebuchadnezzar. So reading from Daniel chapter 2, but we just cut it for the purpose of time. We cut it only from verses 21 and 22. It says, God changes times and seasons, and He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things, and He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with Him. I want us to take note of these special declarations about God. The first one is that He has sovereignty over nature. He said He changes the times and seasons, and nobody can question Him, and nobody can alter whatever He has ordained. And then He said He deposes kings, He brings down kings, and then He raises up others. And He gives wisdom to the wise. So there's no person that is wise or will be wise or claim to be wise on this earth who can have that kind of wisdom without God. And any wisdom that is without God which what the Bible calls the wisdom according to the earth, according to human this thing. Such wisdom that of the earth, and we know that they are selfish and they are human and not divine. Then he said God also gives knowledge to the discerning. And we're told that it is the knowledge of God that will make us to be strong and be able to do exploits. And then he reveals deep and hidden things. There are many things that are at the realm of the supernatural that human beings cannot discern. They cannot understand it except God reveals it. And the Bible also says that the hidden and the secret things, that they belong to God. It is only what he reveals that we can have access to. And then he said he knows what lies in the darkness. The things that people have put and they claim that, it is hidden. It is covered in the uttermost darkness. But he said that God knows them. God sees everything. He knows everything. And he said that light dwells with him. If light dwells with him and is the source of light, then there's nothing that can be hidden. And that is why this passage or this statement that he is the one who determines what happens and what does not happen should be very, very instructive to us. Then we also read from Daniel chapter 4 what happened after King Nebuchadnezzar has exercised that authority, that absolute authority by which he boasted too, when the 3 Hebrew children refused to bow down to that statue he had set up. He got very angry and he had to heat that furnace 7 times more just to show his power. And those young boys said, when they were not mindful, whatever will happen, they know their God will deliver them. But even if he doesn't deliver them, they will not bow down to a transient power or authority like the one Nebuchadnezzar was wielding. And of course, he got angry and went ahead to carry out his threat on the lives of those young boys. And we're told that the sovereignty of God was also demonstrated. That while they were there in the fire, even though there were 3 people that were thrown into that fire, they saw a 4th man that Nebuchadnezzar recognized as the Son of Man. That's Christ himself, who was there with those Hebrew children in the furnace. And the Bible also tells us that not even a hair or maybe a part of their garment was touched by the fire. Whereas the fire licked up and consumed those who were throwing them inside. They were the subjects, but the people that were throwing them into the fire were the ones who burnt and nothing happened to them. That is also the sovereignty of God. And then after that incident, Daniel chapter 4 made us understand that there was a decree that was sent out. And when the angel was announcing it, he said that this was the decree by the watchers and the demand by the word of the holy ones. And what was their declaration? He said, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. That was the purpose. They said, we want God to demonstrate to Nebuchadnezzar that God himself is the most high and is the one that ruleth in the kingdom of men. And nobody can change whatever he has uttered. And that he giveth it to whosoever he will, and he set up over it the basest of all men. The sovereignty of God, even in rulership. And this decree was followed up by action, by its fulfillment. Because we also read in that chapter 4, continue from verse 25. Nebuchadnezzar now was talking about that dream. And he said that one of the things that this watcher said was that he will be driven away from people, and he will live with wild animals, and he will eat grass like the ox, and be drenched with the dews of heaven. And that 7 times will pass by for him, until he acknowledges that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes. That was just the intention, because he has exalted himself so much above every human being, and he was even claiming to have the power of a God who could do and undo. And he was wielding this power over the Jews that he was instigated to persecute at that time. And then he said, something is going to happen to him, a humiliating experience, the one that will make him to live with wild animals, and the one that will make him to eat what animals are eating, instead of the choicy and very, very nutritious food that kings eat in their palaces. But this one now, he won't even have a place to lay his head. His bed and his palace will be the bush. And then that he will be drenched with the dew of heaven, no protection. And as it will happen to him for 7 years, until he acknowledges that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and give them to anyone he wishes. And having passed through that experience, in verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar then acknowledged, he said, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. That was his own testimony. But he continued this testimony, which has now become a lesson. They were lessons for him, and then there are lessons he's teaching us. He continues in verse 34b. He said, God dominates and does what he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. So he does whatever he wants, he both in heaven and then on earth. He does whatever he wants. And he said his dominion is an eternal dominion. God is only one who has an eternal dominion. His reign and his influence, his dominion, does not have any end or limitation. And he said his kingdom endures from generation to generation. So it's not like the ones that say, oh, somebody has been overthrown. A king or a kingdom has been overthrown. Or said a king or a president or a ruler has been deposed or replaced. It's not like God. The kingdoms have come, they have risen, they are falling, but the kingdom of God continues forever. And that's what the Bible declared when Jesus was born. It said that of the kingdom shall be on his shoulder, and of the increase of the kingdom there shall be no end. All other kingdoms have time limits. No matter how the king stays on the throne, one day he passes away. And no matter how a ruler stays, like now, politicians, tenures have been created for them. First term, 4 terms, 4 years, and then second term, which means that the highest is 8 years. In democratic governments. But in autocratic governments, they don't change. They don't want to say that until bullet either removes them or maybe insurgency drives them away, like it has happened to Assad of Libya, who was propped up and being supported by those axis of evil rulers. And suddenly, and within just a very short time, his power evaporated and he lost all his glory. And he's somebody now that the Syrians are celebrating after years of keeping them in bondage. He's the one now who has gone into exile. And you see how transient man's dominion and man's power can be. And he said that God does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand and say to him, what have you done? He's not accountable to any man. He's not accountable to any other authority, because there's no other authority that is higher than God's authority. He's sovereign, and it's eternal sovereignty that he exercises. And that's why nobody can query him or ask him or call him to give account of what he does. And that's the real power. Not these ones that after they have served for many years, EFCC in Nigeria will come after them. In other places, they will set up probe, or the International Criminal Court will come after them for the things that they have done. And many of them, when convicted, they go to prison. And it's from, what they say, from palace to the prison, or from grace to grass. But with God, there's nothing like that, because he's the one who institutes authorities, and he also can remove them or debase them. And this is why in Psalm 2 verses 10 and 11, we have this counsel that the Lord himself gives to kings and rulers. And by kings and rulers, it means just people who find themselves in a position of authority or a position of influence, and they think that they are the beginning and the end, and the Alpha and Omega. There is an advice that is given to them. And remember in that Psalm 2, from verse 1, it talks about how the kings and the rulers of this earth, how they bind themselves together and they want to strip themselves of God's control and God's sovereignty over their lives. But the Bible said that God laughs at them, laughs them to derision. And then after saying that, and when he even asks that we should give him, we should ask him for all the nations and these things, the tribes, so he can give it to us as an inheritance, as well as that applied to Christ in that passage. Then they were advised. It said, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Because God is sovereign, and we cannot take him for granted in any way. That's why this advice came to anyone that is posing himself as a sovereign, that they should know that there are limits. It is only the Lord that can exercise that power or sovereignty over nature and humanity. And so, having heard this, how does it apply to us? And how is it going to help us to navigate the times in which we are? And this tendency to despondency that is coming upon the world at individual levels, at community levels, even at family levels, where people tend to exercise absolute power, where people have to claim that they are bigger and more powerful than others. How they will threaten the peace and the freedom of other people. And how they don't do it so arrogantly. But how do we live wisely in that kind of context? And as the title says, we need an understanding of this sovereignty of God. And we also have to submit to Him so that we will enjoy the benefits of His protection and His provisions. The first thing I want us to be aware of is that those things that are uncertain, they are very clear before God. The things that are unknown, they are very much known and open to Him. So He knows the future. He knows the hidden things. He knows, like we said, that even the things that are hidden in the dark, they are known to Him. And we have, there are songs that we sing. We know who holds tomorrow. And we know that our lives are secured in His hand because He holds tomorrow. We can trust Him. We can have that assurance that we make it because God knows everything. God knows everything. And there's nothing that is happening on this earth that He does not know. And if we know God to that extent, the Bible says that they that know their God, they shall be strong and they will do exploits. So if we know God to that extent, that He knows what lies ahead, then we should not fret. We should not worry. Even if the whole earth is shaking, we know that God has everything in His hand. That's another thing that we need to know too. And we sing that song. We say He has got everything under His control. He has got the whole world in His hand. He got every situation under His control. He's the one that He can turn things around. He can change the times and seasons. He can speak to the storms and they will cease. He can speak and there will be a way in the wilderness. He can speak and the seas and the oceans will part so that there will be pathways for people to go through. These are the promises that God has assured us about. So He exercises His sovereignty also over the things that bother us. And in teaching us a pattern of prayer we should pray. In Matthew chapter 6, the Lord started talking about, He said the first thing we have to acknowledge who He says, our Father who art in heaven. He's in heaven, but He feels everywhere. He knows everything. Then He said, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. There's a kingdom where God Himself rules. And that kingdom is what Jesus came to introduce to us on the earth. To bring us to that point where we will understand the sovereignty of God and be submissive to it. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is what Jesus taught us to pray. We have to have that understanding that God's kingdom supersedes whatever thing that we're experiencing. And it is our desire always that his will be done on earth as it is done in heaven. And we know that God's will in heaven precludes all those things that are happening to us which try to consternate us, that we become very, very surprised and we are not able to handle them. Yeah, and that's why he taught us all those things. Then, and look at then how we now set up everything that is bothering us. And he talks about providing for us. Give us this day our daily bread. And the Lord taught us about that too when we read the account of how he sustained the children of Israel in the wilderness. He sustained them. And even to the point that God told them in Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 3, he said, I did not allow you to eat whatever or have whatever you wanted to eat, because I wanted you to learn that man does not depend by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. He told them that. And then verse 18, he said, I am also the God who gives you power, the strength, the wisdom, the ability to create wealth. So there's nothing that we need that God cannot provide. And that's why I said, okay, we trust him that he can give us all that we need, our food, our daily bread, on regular basis. Then he also taught us about our forgiveness, which he says that our forgiveness lies on how much we forgive others. And then in concluding that, and then that we also trust in him not to lead us into temptation. By his grace, that we can overcome temptation. By the power that he gives us, because that's one of the things we inherited when we believed in Jesus Christ. John 1:12, he said, as many as received him, to them he gave power to be sons of God. It's one of the things that we enjoy. The power to overcome. And then finally, it was winding up, he said, because for thine is the power, the glory. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. God's kingdom, God's power, God's glory is manifested. And God wants to continue demonstrating that in the things we encounter, in the things we experience. And that is why we should every day bear that in mind, that we are more than conquerors because of Christ who strengthens us. And then Jesus himself also demonstrated this when he was faced with the greatest challenge of his own life, going to be crucified on the cross. And he got to the Garden of Gethsemane when that time was approaching for him to pay that price. Remember that he sought for the Father's intervention 3 times. Father, if it is your will, if it is possible, let this cup pass me. But we know that God's sovereignty and God's will are not subject to our own conveniences, but we are the one to submit and subject ourselves to God's own will. And that was why the 3rd time he said, not my will, but your will. Not my will, but your will. In other words, he surrendered to the sovereignty of God. And the Bible said that immediately he did that, angels came and strengthened him. And he was able to go and confront those people who have come to arrest him. And the Bible makes us understand again too in Isaiah 55 that our ways, that God's ways are different from our ways. His ways are higher, and his thoughts are better than ours. And that is one of the reasons why we have to trust him and submit to him. Because he has a better plan, a better idea of what is happening, a better perspective of what is happening, so that we don't take it for granted. And we are the ones who have to yield to him, because his ideas, his thoughts are better than our own. And finally, in Jeremiah chapter 29, when the children of Israel were going on exile into a land of uncertainty, and also a strange land that we are not very familiar with. But God told him, said, yeah, while other people were prophesying and saying, no, don't go, God told them, if you obey and go, you will enjoy my blessing, because he said, I know the plans I have for you. The plan to do you good and not evil. God always has in mind a better outcome in whatever situation we find ourselves or whatever situation we're going through. God always has a better plan. And that's why it is important to then operate at the level of faith and trust in God. If God is saying he's leading us, and we know that that thing is not even what is pleasant to us, but because God is faithful and sovereign, then we must put our trust in him and have faith enough to follow him. Peter, that day, when he was asked by Jesus to cast his net in the places where he has been laboring overnight and he didn't catch anything. And then the Lord said to him to cast his net there. I know he was arguing. He was giving reasons why there will be no fish there, based on his past experiences. But he was dealing with a sovereign God. But when he realizes and said, not according to what I say or what I see, but according to your word, I'm going to drop. I will obey. And when he obeyed, and we saw that he caught so many fishes that their own boat, he and his brother, their boat got filled up and was sinking. They had to invite John and his own brother to bring their own boat. And the Bible said that what they caught filled the two boats. And that's exactly what happens. And that's why that song says to us, all we need to do is to trust and obey. Because there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and to obey. And that is the admonition I'm leaving with us. Especially this year, that we don't know what it portends, what it will bring. We have had people prophesying and speculating. Those are all human beings. And they're only forced to try to understand what God is doing. But the Bible said in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 that God has put eternity in our hearts so that we cannot fathom out what he's doing. So we cannot lay hold to it. And that's why we have to only walk by faith and trust in him. So as we are entering this year that is pregnant with so many things, in fact, what people are predicting may be far-fetched from what in reality will be happening. But whatever it is, whether it is positive or negative, what our discussion today is inspiring us to do is to still put our faith and trust in the Lord, no matter what happens. And to know that he's able to guide us, he's able to lead us. All that we need to do is just open our ears to what he's saying, open our eyes to what he's showing, and open our minds to the promptings and the instructions that he's given. That is the only way we can navigate the challenges of these times. And that's the only time where we can also live wisely, if we understand and know this God. At least to the extent that even if all the things we're expecting has not been done, that we can say, Lord, I trust you and I believe in you because you have been faithful from the beginning. He's the same God yesterday, today, and he will be forever. And what he said he will do, he has done. And the other ones he said he will do, he's still doing them. And if there's anything that we're expecting or we promised, he promised that he has not done yet. Maybe the time has not come. That's why all that we need to do is to put our trust in him, knowing that he's the sovereign God. He knows everything and he's capable of doing what we're asking him to do. And he can even do more than the things we have asked, because it is usually in his character to do much more than we can think or even ask. I pray that the Lord will help us as we review together and as we try to settle our minds to what is going to happen this year, both in our individual lives, in our family lives, in the ministry, in whatever we're doing, that we put it in mind that there's always a Father who cares, who has made provision for our safe landing. But we must follow his teachings and follow his instructions so that it will be well with us. Thank you very much, and God bless you.